Don't forget to follow Grit Daily News as well as me, your host, Loralyn Mears, everywhere on social media. And how about throwing 4 or 5 stars our way if you're listening to Apple or Spotify? Subscribe to our show. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Grit Files. I am your hostess, Loralyn Mears, here at Grit Daily News. And we've got not one, but 2 people focused on energy here. And it's all about what can we do as a society to reduce our carbon footprint? And oh my God, is there a possibility of saving money while we do that too? Well, that's Branch Energy. And not only do I already like these guys because of what they stand for, but they're Canadian. And so from the homeland. So we've got co-founder number 1, Dr. Ince-Cushman, who is maybe smarter than the average bear with a PhD in nuclear physics from MIT. And not to be outdone, we've got Dan MacDonald from McGill, who was one of my college rivals, McGill University, degree in commerce there. And together, the 2 of them have teamed up to form Branch Energy. They've recently scored a $40 million mega deal with ENGIE North America. And they're here to talk to us today about what's going on with respect to energy sustainability efforts and what Branch Energy does. So enough of that. Let me stop talking. Dan, Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Well, let's dig in because this is the Grit Files. And as an entrepreneur, we all know that the path is not usually easy. So let's talk about what the experiences that you've had thus far and the things that you've really had to struggle through to get going. What's the toughest and grittiest experiences you've had in this journey so far, guys?
Gosh, this is a lot. Hard to choose. I'll also say, for what it's worth, that this is not Daniel's first rodeo. He's done a number of startups and has the battle scars to prove it. So maybe I should let you answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think just that 0 to 0.1 is always really hard. Just getting that initial team going and getting people excited before you have funding is it's a complex thing. You're sort of building on a dream and turning it into a reality, a funded reality is a really hard step. And I think just getting that first check is really, really not as easy as I wish it was. So I think that's been our toughest thing, I think, today. But I think we got a great team of mostly smooth sailing, frankly.
So far, so good. Yeah, I think I just to build on Dan's comment, I think fundraising initially is certainly something you want to get right. I'd also say, though, and this is perhaps the less sexy answer, though, but a huge amount of building a business isn't the really cool wheeling and dealing and stuff, right? It's just there's huge amounts of just minutia that you have to just plow through. It's sort of how do you payroll deductions, you know what I mean? Just filling out, it's completely unsexy, completely not interesting. And it's more trying to jog in waist deep water for a marathon, right? Versus, there's a lot of that too, right? And I think part of what makes that palatable is just being focused on a problem you're really passionate about. And I think, we'll talk about that more later on this conversation, I'm sure, but, we're really excited about the project that we're working on, and that makes it easier to bear.
And you're so right about that daily slog. Remember, I talked to one founder and somebody on his team came forward and said, what brand of toilet paper do you want in the office? And he lost his mind. He's like, I can't make one more freaking decision. I'm done, right? So let's get into that problem that you're solving and why you're so passionate about it. Explain it to our audience as if we were a bunch of aliens that just landed over there in Toronto. And Dan, it's so great to see the We the North hat that you're sprouting there. So we've just landed our starship and you're talking to us about Branch Energy. What do you do? Explain it.
Yeah, Branch Energy is a company that's using software and data science to help regular people, regular homeowners, reduce their carbon footprint whilst reducing their energy cost by figuring out which specific smart energy devices will help save them the most. So that's sort of what we're up to. And the reason why we're excited about it is because when we were studying the climate problem and the various technologies that were available, while there's some really cool, like cutting edge, like science fiction and future stuff, what struck us was just how much stuff there is that we could do right now with the existing technology if we could just reduce the amount of friction required for the average homeowner to get the right things installed. And that's sort of where it came from.
Got it. Now, how long have you been at it?
Well, we got going in earnest at the beginning of last year, so 2021. And we got our first fundraise around this time last year. Then we got regulatory approval to operate as an energy company in Texas in August. We launched in September. And since then, we've been growing at about 50% a month. Yeah, so off to the races.
Excellent. And so with respect to what you've tried to put together here, and I shouldn't say even tried, what you have put together, Dan talked about building the team. How have you gone about this, given COVID, given some of the restrictions, given Canada, US, and any of those permutations? Can you talk to us about what that's looked like?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's first off, it's like arguably the most important. I think, like, choosing a great problem that you're credible to solve, and then assembling the right people is, to some extent, those are the two big problems that you need to get right. And so it's something we think a lot about. I think one interesting thing in terms of sort of making lemon out of lemonades is we were born in the pandemic, and so we kind of had to manage through a remote first work environment from the beginning by necessity. But one of the implications of that is it allowed us to relax the constraints in terms of where we were hiring, right? So, conventionally you might be like, okay, well, let's try to get everybody in one particular city. But because of this fact that everybody was going to be remote anyway, we took a little bit more flexible approach. And as a result, we were able to cast a wider net and get some like truly amazing people on the team who otherwise might not have been a fit just because they're not in the same town. So we actually sort of flipped it on its head and used it to a bit of an advantage. And so now we've got a pretty distributed team of incredible people, in the US and Canada, a few in the UK, and some in Brazil.
Yeah, to dovetail with that, we've got, we were fortunate to both do well in our careers prior to this. And, when you're, a good boss, show competency, and you build this network of folks that begin to trust you, and they're spread across the world. And so a lot of the Seed Crystal team members were people we've known from previous experience that just, trust us, believe in us, we believe in them. So it was a lot easier to get those first few folks. I mean, it's still hard, but it's still a lot easier, especially when, some are in London, England, some are in, Vancouver, some are in New York, and just that remoteness allows us to get them together in a much more seamless way.
Now, entrepreneurship, especially when you're playing like big stakes in energy, is full of all kinds of things that throw you for a loop. So what threw you guys off course, if anything? And then if yes, then how did you recover? What did you do? Because our entrepreneurs want to hear that, right? Because nothing's that linear and perfect. And, there's mountains to climb. There's all kinds of stuff. It's not just easy pedaling.
Well, the day after we got regulatory, we signed, we put our first paperwork in for our regulatory approval. Our sort of went public. It was picked up by a local kind of an industry paper, and our previous employer was not particularly excited by that, and we came to terms understanding the legal process of an emergency injunction in the Texas courts, and how crazy it can be getting a summons at first thing Monday morning and having to be in court by mid-afternoon. I mean, it settled very quickly. Everything's fine, but it was just skip to the end. Like, it was without merit and was settled, and there was no real issue. They were just a little bothered. But when you get something like that, it's like quite daunting. I was sitting with my family over Christmas and just thinking everything's gonna be fine, and we wake up to this news and we're like, oh my goodness. And you just don't expect, you had a 1 month plan and you just threw it out the door and you're like, we're managing this now.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing, right? Is you have to be deeply interested in the truth, regardless of if it's good or bad. I think it's a very human thing to sort of like hope for the best. And you like to be an entrepreneur, you have to be optimistic, but you also have to like be very, very clear-eyed about what's true and like what is the signal that you're getting telling you about how the business is going. And so that's something that takes discipline. And, you know, most of the time the news is bad. Like surprises are usually bad, right? And just sort of having the stomach to sort of ingest bad news consistently and stay positive and figure out solutions, right? That's what you got to do.
Yeah, the entropy of the world wants companies to come apart.
That's right.
So you just like it's like carrying a waterbed up like 50 flights of stairs, you know, on an empty stomach.
And you talk about nasty surprises. Last week, I incorporated Delaware. I mean, not last week, but last week I went in there, and Delaware has a franchise tax, and they levied a penalty on me for $89,000. I just about lost it.
Yeah.
Like on the edge. I'm like, are you kidding me? We don't have those kinds of revenues and things. Like that's not where we are yet in our trajectory. 89,000 in a fine for a franchise tax. Now we've worked through it, but it's those kinds of things where you have to pull yourself back off the edge, get focused. That's right. Get the people you need, like the, you know, accountants, the attorneys, and you're like, figure this out because this is not good. And we need to overcome this. Right. And like you said, everything else that you had planned for the week, just out the window because this is on fire and you need to deal with it now. Right?
Yeah. No, there's a lot of regulatory stuff that like most entrepreneurs just like don't know about, like franchise tax and state licensing and 4 quals. And, you know, all of a sudden you're hiring someone in Washington State and they like just employing someone there is almost a nightmare. So getting everything spun up, and it's like, and you're never intending to do things wrong, but there's just like so much complexity around business that you just invariably get kind of punched in the gut a bit, and you just got to move on and just realize that you're going to get through it.
Now, Branch Energy is doing well. It sounds like, you know, from the get-go, you guys have already had a very positive and pretty rapid trajectory. So congratulations on that. That's pretty amazing. But there's usually 1 or 100 things that people would do differently when they look back. And so if I gave you an undo button now and said, you got to hit it once, whether it be personally or professionally, what do you each do differently?
That's a good question.
That's a really good
What's
question.
Your number one undo?
My number one undo would be, I think like charted fairly.
Oh, you know what? I've got one.
Tell me.
I've got one. So I feel like we're talking a lot about government forms, but and this is like maybe too much detail for like listeners to be interested in. But basically, when we applied for our initial license to be an energy provider in Texas, we applied with the Delaware C Corp that we started the business with, and then part of the deal with Engie. And for listeners, we signed a $40 million supply agreement with Engie so we can partner with them to supply our customers with 100% green energy. But the way that we needed to structure that deal was to have a subsidiary that was technically the partner with Engie. And that was just because it's helpful to like separate the IP from the business with the sort of the energy supplying. And it doesn't matter, but we ended up having a subsidiary, right? And it turns out that the process for transferring the license from our C Corp to the subsidiary, we just couldn't do it. Like we ended up like, we thought it would be true. Like, oh yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine. We'll like fill out some form and they'll let us do it. But they're just like, you can't do it. So we literally ended up having to apply for a second license, like from scratch, and then migrate all of our customers over. It was so painful. So yeah, I think that was one thing that if we had created that subsidiary initially and then done the application, that would have saved, you know, hundreds and hundreds of hours of pain and suffering.
Yeah. I would have also waited like 7 extra days before we signed the settlement agreement.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Anyway, as you say, there's tons of things that you do differently. I will say that one thing that we do try to separate out is the difference between did you have a bad outcome versus did you make a bad decision? Because those are different, right? I think like what we had, like what I just described to you is something we could have predicted, right? If we had done more homework, like we knew that we are going to do one of these agreements down the line, we could have figured that out if we were sort of playing chess a few minutes ahead. But there's other times where you make a decision, and given the information you had, that was the best decision at the time, given the information you had, right? And then, you know, like take a hire, for example, like, you know, you hire somebody and it doesn't work out. If all of the signal that you had at the time you made the decisions was good, then that's not necessarily a bad decision. It's just like, it just didn't work out okay. And so when we're like assessing how things are going and how things went, we do try to separate out, like, you know, the result from the decision process.
Talk to us a little bit about the energy market, because this is the first time in over 100 episodes that we've had a group of founders in a startup focused on energy. We've talked about just about every other kind of tech, but not energy. Maybe paint a little bit of background for our listeners to give them a little color as to the market that you're playing in.
Yeah, well, I mean, energy is one of these fascinating things where, like, it's such an important thing in our daily lives, and yet we give it so little mind and attention, right? Like, all of modern life is predicated on the ability to like flip a switch and it just works all the time, and it doesn't actually cost that much if you think about it. Like, how much would you actually be willing to pay for power? Right? Yeah, a lot. So it's a core part of society. And part of the reason we started this company is because it's not just core for modern life, but making sure that we're delivering energy, like society, delivering energy in a way that is minimizing the impact on the environment is incredibly important. And so I think, you know, maybe we can talk for endlessly about, like, you know, how the grid works and all, like, the technical and science and all that stuff behind it. But I think the main thing for people to understand is that we are going through not just like a once in a generation, but once in like a century or two shift in terms of how our energy system works, right? Like, we're shifting from an energy system that's predominantly driven by fossil fuels to trying to figure out ways to supply energy in ways that doesn't create greenhouse gases, like wind and solar and hydro and all these things. And so that's the sort of broader context for what's happening in energy. And the perspective that we're taking is that there's an opportunity to not just modernize, you know, the power plants and the transmission and distribution infrastructure. And there's a lot of folks who are working on that in earnest. But what we're really focused on is how can we optimize the home, like the edge of the network, right? I think there's, you know, the energy companies in the past have spent a lot of time figuring out how to get electrical power to the outside of your house. But, you know, they're not well known for having like great customer service, for example, or like helping you actually think through the decisions you have to make in your home. And that's really where we're focusing.
I guess it's that whole frontier of blending in IoT, right? The Internet of Things in combined with energy. That's, I guess I'm thinking that that's probably where your niche is. You don't see a lot of other companies, or especially not the energy companies, playing at that level. And it needed to be done.
Yeah, and it does. And it is a hard problem in some sense, right? I think like there's two things which are true. One is if you read out any of the academic literature, right, around like what are the costs associated with doing these things, it's very, very clear that there's a lot of money to be saved by deploying the right devices in the right place, right? Like a simple example, like really, really toy example, but like smart thermostats, right? They like cost $100 or something like that. If you get one of those things installed and like get it on a little, you know, automation thing going on, like you'll save a few $100 a year. So you'll like, the payback is less than a year, NPV positive, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, if you were an economist or whatever, you just do it all day long. But it's not just true of smart thermostats. It's true of like smart water heaters and rooftop solar in a lot of places, and heat pumps and all these different things will, in many cases, will save people money, but they're not doing it because there's a lot of friction, right? Like most people don't wake up on a Saturday morning and are like, hey, like, let me do the NPV calculation for how much I'll save, you know, if I install this smart water heater, right? It's like kind of complicated math, and you got to like go to Home Depot and buy a thing and then coordinate an install. And then, you know, the payback, if it's, you know, a few years, like if it's 12 or more months, like people, anyway, very few consumers are willing to do all that effort, right? And so part of our approach is to use data science and all the information that we have to help our customers figure out which devices will make sense for them, and then provide them with custom offers so that we can finance and install those devices for them. So it's very low friction. So that's kind of what we're focused on doing.
Is it fair to say it's like a turnkey solution where you simplify the math and say, you could save this if you hired this company to install this device? And oh, by the way, click this button for this cost and it'll be in your home next week. Is that, am I being a bit glib, or is that kind of, all right?
We're trying to get to a user experience where you just have to say yes a few times and then like somebody comes to your home and does it for you. That's where we're aiming for.
Cool. And then you not only reduce your footprint, but you save money. What a winning combination. All right. So we're getting toward the end of our show here. Talk to us about how our audience can help you guys at Branch Energy. What can we do?
Well, great question. I think first thing that you can do is get interested in climate. I think I'd say the last year alone, I think the amount of time and energy and focus and societal interest has really been growing. And so I'd encourage folks to like not just skip over the articles or whatever, like start educating yourselves a little bit. And then two, I'd say if you're in a place where you can do so, look into switching over to green energy. Most energy providers will let you do it. Doesn't cost much. And then, of course, if you're in Texas, by all means, Texas is our first market. We're planning to expand quite a bit over the next few years. But for now, if you're in Texas, go to branchenergy.com and check us out.
Perfect. And exactly. Read those articles about the large Arctic shelf masses that are falling off and right. I mean, read about them. Okay. We just talked about really serious stuff, very heavy stuff like, climate change and, polar bears drowning on little pieces of ice and stuff like that. So let's turn it around and end our podcast on a positive note, because Branch Energy is doing some incredible things to change the game here. So fun question, signature question, a bit silly, but we're going for it anyway. If we got the chance to look into your closets, and I'm going to ask you both, and there was a pair of footwear in there that personified who you are, talk to us about that footwear and why it represents you.
I'll certainly say this is the first time I've been asked that question.
I bet.
Yeah, I'm taking inventory of all the types of footwear. I'm like running shoe, dress shoe, flip flops. I'd say running shoe for me. I think I do a lot of, I run a lot personally. I just find it's very relaxing. It's like meditation. And it's just I always just plow ahead. I always just keep the cadence up, keep going, ignore the fatigue, and just your knees hurting a bit. Don't worry. Just give it a few more seconds. Your brain will start ignoring it soon enough. And just like plowing through it, and that's my shoe if I had to.
And by the way, that growling you just heard was my dog Lucy, who came into the office today.
Oh, hello, Lucy.
No
we love all things fur here, so that's awesome. Okay, Dan, so you're the running shoe guy that just nothing's gonna slow you down. You're gonna keep running. Alex, what about you? What footwear personifies who you are?
Well, Dan probably stole my answer. I also love a good running shoe, but maybe building on it,
actually running shoes. My entire description is probably you, but better.
Well, how about building on that theme? I do it a little bit less now than I used to, but I love mountain climbing, and I have some pretty serious mountaineering boots, which are an incredibly important piece of, arguably the most important piece of equipment if you do mountaineering. And they're well loved and have got me up a bunch of mountains. And maybe that's a metaphor. I do love climbing a good mountain.
There you go. With that, thank you very much to Dan MacDonald and Alex Ince-Cushman, co-founders of Branch Energy. Thank you for coming to our show and for making a difference, helping customers reduce their carbon footprint, because we all need to do that. And helping us save money in this era of inflation. My God, we all need new solutions. So thank you for that. And I wish you continued and tremendous success at Branch Energy.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
And how about that fantastic intro by Touch Circle?